the two components of this program are obviously the science of which nutritional excellence prevents disease, can be used therapeutically to reverse and treat disease, and also to enable us to have a better, more high-quality life and a longer life. The other half is the understanding of how nutrient adequacy controlled food behaviors, food cravings, hunger, and addiction. And that's really an important distinction that makes the science regarding this program special. The word nutritarian, I think is a great word because it essentially describes all of us and all people around America who are finally realizing and waking up to the idea that what we put in our mouth matters, and we are in control of our health destiny by the quality of the food we eat. It's a simple concept, but so lost among Americans. I remember when I was about 15 years ago, No, about 10 years ago. 10 years ago, my daughter, Kara, who's now 16, was 5. We were working out at a gym right near my house called Health Quest, and she was coming out of a program that she called Boo Boo Camp. It was kids' boot camp. And so she came out of, she said, I'm coming out of Boo Boo Camp, and I met her there, and she said to me, don't these parents love their children? And I said, of course they love their children. What are you talking about? She said, well, they're all just sitting there eating junk food, eating like chips and cupcakes and candy, and don't they know that that hurts your body? So I said, yeah, well, there's some idea that it might have some problems with that, but they've cut themselves off from that thought process. It's almost as if that everybody smoked cigarettes in the neighborhood, and even the kids on the swings were in the playground were smoking cigarettes, and the parents on the porch of the house waving goodbye to their children on the bus in the morning were smoking cigarettes. All the kids waiting at the bus stop were smoking cigarettes. It's just seen as normal what everybody does. They don't really know that they're hurting their children. They don't really know that what they put in their mouth becomes their body and is the determinant of their future health. And she said to me, how could they not know that? How could they be so stupid? My children always had a lot of problems with trying to figure out why the rest of the world couldn't understand the most simple, basic concept in the world, that the food that we put in our mouth becomes who we are. Our body is made up of the food we put in our mouth, and that we pay a price for putting poor quality food in your mouth. And obviously, you guys are all nutritarians, and when I speak to groups, a lot of the people understand this basic concept, that what you put in your mouth has some effect on your health. And I call those people philosophical nutritarians. They're not yet practicing nutritarians, right? So the purpose of this week is to take those practicing nutritarians to share their expertise, their modeling, what they've learned over the years, to help people that are philosophical nutritarians who want to feel how easy and enjoyable and pleasurable and just becomes a no-brainer because it gives you the ultimate ability to have success in your life. Because if you don't have your health, you're in a prison and you can't fully manifest yourself and do good things for the rest of the world, your family, humanity, be happy yourself, enjoy your own pleasures, your hobbies, your interests. You're somewhat crippled by your potential in life when you don't have good health. Nutritarian is a person who strives for more micronutrients per calorie in their diet style. And that's, I'm saying this at the beginning instead of the end here, is that we recognize that the American population, the American diet, is deficient in micronutrients. And we're going to learn this week how micronutrient deficits leads to diseases and fuels overeating behavior. Now, in the American diet that Americans are eating, obviously, the diet Americans are eating consists of 62% of calories from processed foods and about 25% from animal products. So clearly, the 10%, where it says 10% from unrefined plant foods, of course, keep in mind that 10%, half of that is white potato. So the non-white potato, fruits and vegetables, is less than 5% of total caloric intake in America, which is exceedingly low. But getting back to the lecture here, food gives us macronutrients and micronutrients. And that's some basic concepts we'll have to be able to discuss as the week progresses to distinguish between macronutrients and micronutrients. They're both nutrients. The macronutrients are fat, carbohydrate, and protein. Those are the calorie-containing nutrients. But water is also considered a macronutrient. We don't consider that here because we're not talking so much about water. We're talking mostly about the calorie-containing macronutrients, fat, carbohydrate, and protein. And the thing to remember here about those nutrients, fat, carbohydrate, and protein, is that Americans eat too much fat, they eat too much carbohydrate, and they eat too much protein, right? We're taking in about a third more calories than our bodies need, and many Americans take in double the amount of calories the body needs. And excess calories causes all the chronic diseases that plague Americans. And we do that in a diet style that's deficient in micronutrients. Now, micronutrients are those nutrients that do not contain calories. They're smaller nutrients, and those are vitamins, minerals, and phytochemicals. In 1930, scientists first discovered the 14 vitamins and 16 minerals, and people said, wow, this was fantastic. We can help people live longer and not get cancer, right? And by 1935, the vitamin industry was already a billion-dollar industry, and they were already adding thiamine and riboflavin into Cocoa Puffs and vitamin C into Kool-Aid, and giving people who were taking vitamin pills. And I think that might have encouraged people to think that they could get these micronutrients from a pill form, and that it was not as necessary to actually get them from food. Maybe that's the case, because between 1935 and 2005, cancer rates went up every year for 70 years in a row. And not just small jumps of a few percent, but large jumps. 500%, 100% increase, 20% increase, 5% increase, 30% increase, kept going up from the year before. And for that 70-year stretch, and that was essentially in this environment of where the knowledge that vitamins and minerals was so important for human nutrition. And it wasn't really till about 20 years ago when scientists first recognized that vitamins and minerals were not the major micronutrient load that was in food. So what I'm saying right now is that vitamins and minerals are a minor micronutrient load, or perhaps contain a third or less of the total amount of micronutrient that food contains. So for example, every strawberry has more than 500 nutrients in it. Every piece of broccoli has more than 1,000 nutrients, not just 16. So the idea that vitamin supplementation spurred a tremendous increase in cancer rates, it may be because of some things we're taking in the vitamins that can increase cancer, but the main reason it had that high rate of cancer rates was that our diet became more and more dependent on foods that didn't have that full spectrum of undiscovered nutrients in those years. In the early part of the century, there was less cancer and less heart disease than there was as we progressed through modern history. And both animal products and processed foods are obviously low in micronutrients. For example, animal products do not contain vitamin C or vitamin K or folate or vitamin E or vitamin C or the carotenoid family that has strong effects against cancer. The carotenoid family are beta-carotene, lutein, lycopene, cryptoxanthine. There's none of those phenols or flavonoids or bioflavonoids in animal products or processed foods. So what I'm saying right now is that the same nutrients that are missing in animal products are the same ones that are missing in processed foods. So if you're not going to get them so these nutrients that are missing in animal products and processed foods, we have to get them from obviously fruits, vegetables, from produce, fruits, vegetables, beans, nuts, and seeds. And the small percent in the American diet lays the body at risk for developing not just heart disease and cancer. So we know that, for example, that 51% of the Americans die of heart attacks and strokes, and about 30% die of cancer. And even though 51% of Americans die of heart attacks and strokes, many more people have heart disease than 51%, because those that die of cancer also have heart disease. In fact, over the age of 60, more than 90% of our population is taking medications for their heart and high blood pressure. To have to be on blood pressure medications, you have to have some degree of atherosclerosis. To have to require cholesterol-lowering drugs, you have to have some degree of atherosclerosis already built in your tissues. So when we do autopsy studies on children who die in car accidents, we find that more than 75% of young children between the ages of 7 and 11 already have found to have atherosclerotic plaque on the inner walls of their blood vessels in their heart, have fatty streaks and plaques. And there was a major study done on the men who died in the Vietnam War, whose average age of death was 19 and a half. And more than 80% of those men showed signs of atherosclerosis. And we do studies, and there are some autopsy studies done on adult Americans who die between the ages of 40 and 50 years old that show that heart disease is ubiquitous in that group. Over 95 to 98% have significant atherosclerosis. The point I'm making here is that if you eat like other Americans eat, the inevitable consequence is you're going to develop the same diseases other Americans get, and all Americans develop heart disease, and all Americans develop cancer, right? So if there was a group of men walking by outside, if there was like a retirement community convention at the hotel, and they were walking by and I hooked them with a cane around the neck and anesthetized them against their will really quickly, brought them here up on the stage, took out their prostates, put it in a Vitamix machine. What? What's the Anyway, so put it out on a slide, put an electron microscope on the screen, we'd find prostate cancer cells in 98% of those men. In other words, the same thing would be true if we took women's breasts over the age of 75. We'd find some cancer cells in almost all Americans. The point is you don't escape from the biological laws of cause and effect. So screening, so essentially almost all men and all women develop cancer, except the cancer advances at such a slow rate that it's probably not the major thing that's going to kill people. Because most men who have prostate cancer die of heart attacks, not prostate cancer, because the cancer multiplies and advances very slowly. But the point is, the reason PSAs don't work, one of the reasons mammograms are ineffective and all the scanning and screening techniques don't work is because all people that we're screening probably have some cancer, and they have different types of cancers, and they have different stages in which they're growing and spreading. And so really what we're saying here is, since the diagnostic modalities, the screening modalities, and the treatments for people who have these diseases don't work, the best thing we can do is protect ourselves from getting cancer. And if we have them, we're going to talk about that in a lecture 2 days from now, that intervening with nutrition is the most effective thing we can put cancer to stop the replication process, stop the process of spreading, and extend people's life much more effectively than chemotherapy and what's commonly considered a success when we extend a person's life through medical interventions by 3 to 6 months, which is really insignificant. The other issue here is that if you eat American food, you have to become overweight, right? You have to be on blood pressure medications, you have to develop cancer, you can develop heart disease, you're going to get what other Americans get, and the amount of Americans that are overweight by my standards of excellence is over 90%, right? By the conventional standards, they consider 70% of Americans overweight and about 33% obese. By my standards, more people are overweight than just 70%. Now, if you take that 10% that I consider a normal weight, you have to consider now that, number one, it's probably less than 10%, but number two, that more than 10% of the population smoke cigarettes, are alcoholics, have major depression, have occult cancers, have digestive disorders, have autoimmune conditions, have diseases that keeps them thinner. So really, it's almost a sign of ill health if you're a normal weight on an American diet. A healthy person should become overweight on an American diet. Did you follow that? In any case, the health equation that determines a person's healthy life expectancy, the H stands for your health, but that means not just how long you're going to live, but the quality of your life. And the word healthy life expectancy is defined by the World Health Organization with about 12 different criteria that measures a person's quality of their life in their last 15 years of life. In other words, whether they can see, whether they have mobility, whether they enjoy their life, whether they're in pain, whether they're suffering under receiving invasive medical treatments that may be painful. So if we look at the quality of a person's healthy life expectancy, it's dependent on your lifetime exposure to micronutrients, where the N represents micronutrients and the C represents calories. So that's really micronutrients over macronutrients, which means that we have to strive to eat a diet with a higher micronutrient per caloric density. And we study this in animals, and we find that when we caloric restrict in an environment of micronutrient adequacy, most animals will then live 1.5 times normal lifespan of their counterparts who are not somewhat diminished in calories compared to, allowed to eat as much as they want. And what I'm explaining here is that by eating a large amount of micronutrients, it naturally suppresses appetite. So without having to really focus on eating less, your body naturally desires less calories when you eat sufficient micronutrients. And likewise, you naturally desire more calories when you don't meet the micronutrient needs of your body. So it becomes almost impossible not to overeat when your micronutrient needs aren't being met. So slowing the aging process, this is all about slowing the aging process. That when we eat a diet rich in micronutrients, somewhat lower in calories, and to eat a diet higher in micronutrients and lower in calories, it obviously means we have to not eat so many foods that are high-calorie foods that are lower nutrients. And we have to direct more of our choices to eating foods that have higher micronutrient densities. And we eat those foods with higher micronutrient densities because they have appetite-suppressive effects right? And so low-calorie, high-nutrient eating prolongs lifespan via many different mechanisms. It suppresses genetic alterations, and when genetic alterations occur, which means that the DNA cross-links may be broken or damaged, your body fuels repair mechanisms that can reconnect and reattach any DNA that was broken that may have eventually led to cancer before that even could occur. Decreases free radicals and decreases the production of other toxins. And the other toxins we're going to talk about this week are AGEs, which are advanced glycation end products, right? The primary toxins, but there are a lot of others, lipofuscin and others we're going to talk about. The main ones are free radicals and advanced glycation end products that build up in tissues and age you prematurely. And of course, slowing the metabolic rate. When we eat less calories and meeting our micronutrient needs, we slow the metabolic rate, which means we're aging slower. The speed of your metabolic rate reflects the rate at which you're aging, right? So out there in the artificial world of pop science and women's magazines, right, you're hearing that we want to take things to speed up our metabolic rate so we can eat more food and not get fat, right? And I'm saying the opposite here. I'm saying we want to eat properly so we can age slower and slow down our metabolic rate so we can eat less food and not get too thin. Do you understand the distinction? So we can maintain our muscle structure. We can maintain our full physical strength. We can exercise all day long and not require as many calories and not become too thin because we've slowed down our metabolic rate and we've enhanced our body's efficiency. Years ago, obviously, well, when people came over here in the Mayflower in the 14th century, 70% of those people died because they couldn't find enough food to eat. The ones that survived were people with a slower metabolic rate, and through most of human history, genetics selected out for survival for people who could get by on less food because there wasn't much food around. And the major thing that caused people to not thrive and survive was lack of food, right? But now in today's society, that thrifty metabolic rate person is at a disadvantage because we have food excess and we have a toxic food environment with high caloric concentration, and that leads to these people getting cancer and heart disease and obesity and diabetes at a much younger age, and the person with a faster metabolic rate has an advantage, which is really, it's not an advantage. It's not going to lead to excellent health. The only way we could lead to excellent health is to earn it. You can't buy it, you can't manufacture it, you can't drug it into people. You have to earn it, and you have to earn it through micronutrient quality, right? So we're talking about slowing the aging process and making it so you don't have to eat so much food. And the lecture tomorrow is going to talk about food addictions and food cravings and try to reconnect people with the natural sensations and messages the body gives them, directing them to know exactly how much food to eat. I want you, before you leave this week, one of my objectives is so you know exactly how much food you're supposed to eat at each meal. Right now you might be a little confused about that. It's okay, you'll get it. There's a buffet, you have all these choices to eat. You have to choose selectively. There's a lot of food out there. And we're eating dinner today early at 5:30. And the question is, are you guys going to be hungry for dinner at 5:30? And if so, if you are, you're supposed to be hungry for dinner by 5:30 or 6 o'clock because we're eating early. And that means we should have chosen to eat lightly or the right amount for lunch so you can be hungry in time for 5:30, right? If you're not hungry for dinner, then you ate too much at lunch. So that's really the subject tomorrow, how to adjust the quality of your food intake, because food tastes best and gives you the most pleasure of eating it when you're truly hungry to eat it. And if you want to get as most pleasure of each meal, you want to not overeat the meal prior so you can have hunger be fully manifest so you get all the full pleasure of eating at the following meal, all right? Now, we're talking here about the concept that eating less calories dramatically extends lifespan of all species of animals, including primates. Primates are monkeys and chimps and gorillas, and we're primates, right? So with primates, eating less calories dramatically extends lifespan. However, primates differ from other animals slightly. And for example, if we take the rodents, right, and we feed them less calories, they live longer. If we take the primates and feed them less calories, and we pump up the protein and keep the protein extra high, we find that they don't get the full lifespan advantage, because protein per se has the ability to raise IGF-1, which is insulin-like growth factor 1. So we're talking here that insulin-like growth factor 1 is one of the mechanisms via which caloric restriction enables animals to dramatically enhance lifespan and not get cancer. So when we restrict the rodents from calories, their IGF-1 goes down. When we restrict the IGF-1 in primates, their IGF-1 goes down, except if we pump up the protein as a higher percent of total calories. Even if the total calories are restricted, IGF doesn't go down. And protein concentrates, like casein or whey protein or isolated soy protein, can pump up IGF-1. So we don't want to be adding protein powders and protein supplements, even like the vegan powders, like the soy proteins, because we don't want IGF-1 to go up, we want it to go down. Because IGF-1 is the hormone that's most closely linked with prostate cancer and breast cancer, right? Did you follow that? So we want to make sure that we have the right amount of fat, the right amount of protein, and the right amount of carbohydrate. Because obviously, it's not just the fact that we, drop dead of a heart attack, become demented when you get older, develop high blood pressure and heart disease, get cancer as you age, but people are physically in pain and disabled, and then when they're at an age dramatically cut short and they get close to death, they get rushed off to a hospital to die, right? They can't be left alone in their home with their loved ones around them in a peaceful environment to quietly pass away, but they're rushed off to a hospital. We have to squeak out any couple of days or weeks of life they have left, in the process torture people, right? With invasive and futile medical care, we have to take away a few $100,000 of their savings and cause them to suffer needlessly after aggressive, invasive, and futile medical care. Obviously, that's what when I was a resident, that's mostly what we did. We took people who were coming into the hospital and we tried to keep them alive in the ICU, and we intubated people and did, and put in central lines and kept them alive, and then they would usually die anyway, and then, and it was quite traumatic an experience for all of us residents. I remember we would sit there and talk about it every night in the ICU in the inner city hospitals in New York, and we'd talk among ourselves, and we'd say, when you're close to death, when you have something like this happens to you at this ripe age, and you know what the ripe age of an American is to pass away prematurely, we'd say, do you want to go to a hospital? And every doctor, all those young doctors would say, no way am I going to a hospital. No way is this being done to me. No, every doctor all these doctors want to stay home to die, not go to a hospital to be. But it's part of our culture. It's part of the accepted, normal, it's a norm in our culture today, be rushed off to a hospital. And of course, the point is that, eating fast foods and processed foods and junk food is lots of fun. It is, it's lots of fun. Just like having hemorrhoids and gallstones and, and kidney stones and having reflux and heartburn and, I guess you have to, having your chest cut open, right? And go to a heart-lung machine where your brain's not getting oxygen, so you have bypass surgery or angioplasty performed. I mean, obviously, it's almost impossible not to expect to develop the problems, including psychological and emotional disorders as you get older, if you live like other Americans live. And of course, we talked about sarcopenia, osteoporosis. And what if everybody in America knew that they could have a guarantee never to have a heart attack, never to have a stroke, never to get demented in the later years? I mean, that's worth millions of dollars, right? And that's, who could pass up on that opportunity? And it sounds far-fetched. It's so far-fetched, people think it's ridiculous, don't they? The average person out there, if I told them I'm going to give you a guarantee never to have a heart attack or a stroke, you can't do that. That's ridiculous. How could you do that, right? But look, first of all, look what, in the year 1900, and then, by the way, this slide was just cut and pasted from the American Heart Association's website. I did not draw this slide. It's the exact pasting and cutting just from the data that shows that in the year 1900, less than 3% of the population had heart attacks. And today, obviously, it's 40% of the population, or 40 to 45% of the population. The point is, they weren't eating that perfectly back in the year 1900, and they didn't have heart attacks then, right? We know what causes heart attacks. We know how people don't have to have them. It's not rocket science here to tell people that we can wipe out heart disease, and it's not rocket science that we could wipe out cancer either. We have the means and knowledge and ability to win the war on cancer and to win the war on heart disease, You guys know what's happening. I mean, but we're doing nothing about it because the economic forces that affect Americans, the drug companies, the food industry, the whatever, all the, the advertising dollar goes to who controls the media and the advertising dollar, and what's taught to Americans, the lobbyists, and what's passed in Washington is all based on maintaining the status quo. And the status quo is a population that's very sickly and the most overweight, sickly population in the history of the human race. And unfortunately, over the last 10 years, things have gotten worse. I mean, if you went back, I don't know if any of you noticed this, but this graph was reproduced from my book, Eat to Live, which was published in 2003. And in Eat to Live, this was only 51% of processed foods. Because since Eat to Live was written in 2003, I had to use data that was collected before the year 2000. And this data was collected in the year 2005, and we're already things are even getting worse than they were back then, not better. We're up to 60% of calories from processed foods today. I mean, there might be a small segment of the population that's getting better, but obviously things are generally worse. And soft drink consumption, obviously, now the major source of calories in teenagers' diets is soft drinks. It's utterly amazing, and they're designed, obviously, to be addictive, with caffeine and sugar and salt mixed in. Obviously, they're addictive substances that we might as well just let our children snort cocaine. Cheese consumption went up dramatically over the last 100 years in America. And obviously, people stopped growing gardens and people stopped eating fresh vegetables. And when obviously with cheese having more saturated fat, there are some cancers that are particularly sensitive to saturated fats, especially squamous cell carcinomas, such as lung cancer and mouth cancer and esophageal cancer and stomach cancer, very sensitive to increased saturated fat intake. But of course, we're finding out in recent years that eating foods with a high level of, with a high glycemic response, eating white flour, eating sugar, eating processed foods, doesn't just make us fat, it causes cancer. These foods are cancer-causing foods. So we eat white rice and white bread and drink soda and have bagels and have bread. These foods are empty calories or cancer-causing foods. And we'll have time to go through some of the mechanisms via which that occurs. But keep in mind, when we consume calories that don't contain nutrients, the body isn't able to process those calories without producing free radicals and advanced glycation end products. We're not able to control free radical production when we consume calories that don't contain antioxidants and micronutrients and phytochemicals along with them that come along for the ride. And the other thing, of course, is that when we gain fat, fat is inflammatory on the body, and fat on your body increases your risk of cancer dramatically. Fat is an inflammatory living tissue. And as the body grows fat, the body has to produce angiogenesis factors, growth factors that make blood vessels grow into the fat to supply that fat with nourishment. So another new word you're learning this week is angiogenesis. The word angiogenesis means to grow blood vessels. Since fat is living tissue, right? As we eat foods that promote insulin, that are high glycemic, that promote an insulin response, the high levels of insulin, which lead to the deposition of fat on your body, help turn that sugar and those calories into fat better. And then the high insulin also promotes angiogenesis. It helps the body produce blood vessels to fuel the fat, so we can be more efficient at delivering nutrients and oxygen to grow the fat and keep it growing, keep it living. Did you follow that? Because when we eat foods like beans and greens and berries and onions and mushrooms, they have actually angiogenesis inhibitors. So we're going to learn also that it's the idea that having high glycemic foods like this promotes fat deposition. And it's not just calories in, calories out anymore, right? It's not that your weight and your health is just depending on, just eat less food. Well, that's, of course, ridiculous, because people can't eat less food when they're micronutrient deficient because they're craving more food all the time. So telling a person to breathe less oxygen, right? You're breathing at 14 breaths a minute, try only breathing at 12 breaths a minute. You're not going to be comfortable doing that. You'll be gasping for air in a few minutes. Well, the same thing when you take a person on a diet, tell them to eat less calories. They can't stay with it. The uniqueness and the contribution to science here is that people aren't forced to eat less calories. They naturally prefer to eat less calories when they eat properly. That's the difference here. And we're saying that food, because it's not just calories in, calories out, because of two reasons, or more than two reasons. One is that when we build up toxicity in our tissues from free radicals and from AGEs, it acts as a toxin in our cells, and the body has to dilute the toxicity. It dilutes the toxicity by holding onto fat and holding onto fluid. Right? Number two, when you eat foods like mushrooms, onions, berries, beans, and greens, there's angiogenesis inhibitors that inhibits fat deposition, the opposite of these foods. So it prevents the red blood cells from growing into and feeding the fat supply. These foods actually cause those abnormal red blood vessel growth to atrophy and causing fat to shrink and atrophy in response to eating the right foods. Now, an angiogenesis promoter also promotes cancer. Like fat is like a tumor on the body, and obviously cancer is the same way. And we know that obviously the more we have foods that promote an insulin response with a high glycemic response, that promotes the fueling of nutrients to abnormal tissues and fuels the growth of cancer cells as well. So the right witch's cauldron of ingredients that causes cancer to develop is this combination of a lot of animal protein promoting the growth of cells with the glycemic effect of eating a lot of processed high glycemic foods like breads and sugars. All right? And because the high glycemic effect fuels the growth of the tumors that are promoted from the hormonal milieu, that the hormonal milieu of obviously the American diet raises the hormones that promote cancer, right? And then we feed the cancer with what it needs to grow and replicate, just like we feed our fat. So feeding the same biochemical effects that feed fat, feed the growth of cancer. So that's why there's a relationship obviously between obesity and cancer. The same thing essentially I'm saying here with heart disease, that heart disease is not just the result of eating animal products or animal fats or cholesterol or saturated fat. Heart disease obviously is linked to eating bagels and white bread and refined grains and refined sweets. It's linked to stomach cancer, breast cancer, prostate cancer, and obviously heart disease and diabetes. So eating foods with low nutrients, with high glycemic effects obviously, are very negative, and we're going to speak a lot this week about all carbohydrate foods aren't equal. That some carbohydrate foods have high micronutrient density. Some carbohydrate foods have low glycemic effects. Some carbohydrate foods are very rich in fiber. Some high carbohydrate foods have very high resistant starch. Some high carbohydrate foods are very protective against cancers, and some promote cancers. And by the end of obviously the next few days, you guys are going to have a good hierarchical structure of which carbohydrates are unhealthy and which high carbohydrates are healthy, and why that's the case. All these individual factors that make one food better than another, and that's why we choose the foods we do to design the diet style so it's most protective against cancer. If we wanted to make a dietary model to promote cancer, we would try to make it high in refined carbohydrates, right? And high in meat and cheese at the same time to raise IGF-1, to increase the promotion of saturated fat on squamous cell carcinoma. And we want to protect people from getting too many vegetables, too many fruits, too many beans, too many nuts and seeds, which have phenols, bioflavonoids, arginine, all the resveratrol, phytochemicals, nutrients that actually protect against cancer. We want to keep people from eating too many of those that could cause too much repair to the broken DNA crosslinks that are going to eventually lead people to die prematurely. If we look at any long-lived society around the world, we find that their lifespan is predicted by the amount of vegetables they eat, right? And obviously, I don't consider the Okinawans in Japan, populations that's reaching the potential of human longevity. They're just long-lived compared to Americans, but they're not really long-lived compared to the real potential we have. I don't consider Seventh-day Adventists in California who live on an average of 10 or 13 years, 10 or 12 years longer than the average American. The average non-smoking Seventh-day Adventist lives about 10 years longer than the average American non-smoking person, but I don't consider that to be pushing the envelope of human longevity or being particularly well as well. It's just comparatively, if we look at people around the world, we find that as their vegetable intake goes up and their consumption, especially of raw vegetables, go up, we see their lifespan increase dramatically. But the whole basis of my work in a vegetarian diet is based on the idea, it's not based on planning a diet and then looking for justification, reasons, and studies to make that diet sound good or sound correct. Because this is the problem. It was the problem with, in other words, it's a different way of looking at things. What I'm trying to say is let's not predetermine how we should eat. Let's let the science do that for us. And if that's the case, that the science, that means that we can't say that a vegan diet is the best diet. Because if we're going to say a vegan diet is the best diet, or an Atkins diet is the best diet, or anybody's diet is the best diet, or the zone diet is the best diet, right? What these people do is they take the predetermined diet which they've put in their Bibles, right? And they've written it down, what their predetermined best diet is, and they're going to look for justifications for science to support that, to present it to the public, right? And then if the science doesn't quite support it fully, they have to look for some support for that diet so they can keep promoting what they promoted in the past. And I'm saying here, this is that science is changing, right? It's moving. We have to catch it. We have to stay abreast from it. And we have to and we can't come to any predetermined notions of what's healthiest, because I'm trying to separate here using intellectual purpose to set up a separation between what we think is right, what we want to eat, what we'd like to profess and teach, with really what do the facts say, right? And that's hard for people. It's hard for people to divorce themselves from what they want to preach and want to teach from where the facts are moving us and what the facts say. And there's somewhat a dichotomy there, and it makes it difficult for people, right? So we have to try to look at that, and it's not my position or my job really to teach, because my field of expertise is nutritional science, right? I have other interests, but that's not I may be interested in ethics, I may be interested in morals and the economy and pollution and the environment, but I'm not really an environmental scholar, right? I'm not really an expert in ethics. In other words, the point is there are lots of good reasons, for example, to eat a vegan diet, but my role as a teacher is to teach people what the science is, and that may indicate that a vegan diet is not the best diet for everybody or for certain people, and let's discuss that with as much intelligence and science behind it to see what is the most ideal way to eat, all right? Doesn't mean, so the conclusion is, and the conclusion we're going to come to here, is that the ideal diet has to meet all the requirements for us to live a long life and to meet our requirements even as we're aging in our later years. And that's why we have to tweak a diet that may be low in it, that may have a little animal products in it, to make it more favorable, and we have to tweak a vegan diet to make sure it's not missing anything, to make it most favorable for a person who wants to live 80, 90, or longer. And the reason I use that term 95 to 105, the reason I expect people to live around 100 years old, that potential is there, is because I've been a practicing physician now for almost 25 years. And I didn't go to medical school I didn't start medical school till I was 29 or 30 years old. But in any case, over this 25-year period, I've seen well over 10,000 families. And and we can talk about this over the years. And over the years, I've seen a lot of patients with very advanced diseases come to me, with cancers, with heart disease. I started my practice as a specialist in nutritional medicine right from the beginning. I didn't just and I've seen a lot of people who were elderly coming to see me with medical problems. And now, 25 years later, I'm seeing these 65, 75, and 80-year-old people with advanced diseases. They're still alive. They're still doing well. They're still thriving. People who had heart disease, 70-year-old guys with heart disease told in an angioplasty 20 years ago, who got well and never had the angioplasty, normalized their blood pressure, they're still my patients. Right? 20 years later, they're in their 90s and they're thriving, and they look great and they look young. And so it's having the experience of seeing people live this lifestyle over many, many years, and seeing people who even started later in life and seeing them gain such dramatic health benefits. And people and studying people who ate healthy over the years, people like The Good Life, who wrote the Nearings, Helen and Scott Nearing. Right, Scott Nearing was an MIT scholar. He was a Pulitzer Prize winner. He was an economist, and he showed people how they could live on their own. He lived in Maine, and he had a greenhouse in his backyard and built and grew most of his own food in his last half of his life. And he lived to be over 100 years old. At the age of 101, he was started to not work full-time anymore. And he actually had a big party, a big celebration, invited all his friends and family, and he decided to fast himself to death, actually. And so he died a little over 100 years old. His wife died in a car accident in her mid-90s, but still was going strong and in great health in her mid-90s. They weren't genetically related. One of my friends, Jack Duntrop, had 2 heart attacks before the age of 50. He was still playing singles tennis with me in his 90s. Right? He was one of the original founders of the American Natural Hygiene Society that became the National Health Association, right? And a lot of these people that did so well didn't even know the things we know today. They were even using nutritional science that is what was in its infancy, and they still were able to live into their mid-90s and 100 years old, like Joe Perillo, who was following a plant-based vegetarian diet, nutritarian type diet where he ate no junk food. He was killed at 104 years old. He was killed in a car accident like this year. A Chrysler minivan hit him and was crossing the street in Brooklyn. But he was in great health in 104 years old. You read about that guy? Yeah.
He bent a quarter to Darwinians at the age of 104.
At 104, he could bend a quarter. He was one of those strong men on the Coney Island when he was young, and he was a boxer, and he was always into physical fitness. But he achieved that, obviously, eating very healthfully. And he always watched his diet, or even his mother lived a long time and watched her diet very well. But in any case, in my experience of the last 25 years, in seeing people that ate nutritarian diets or something close to nutritarian diet, we've seen these people either do something wrong that created a problem in their life that can be explained what they did wrong, or they've lived a very, very long life and a good quality life and aged relatively slowly. And that's what I have in my medical practice, is lots of people now who are thriving and in their late 80s and 90s. So I think it's nice to see this. And so one of the themes of this presentation right now is this powerful link between raw vegetables and cancer. And this means that, and that's why I always make the statement, the salad is the main dish, and fill up your plate with a salad and take your hand and compress it down so you can fit more on the plate, right? So it doesn't overflow the plate, and make the salad your main dish. So the cooked vegetables are like the side dishes on the main dish, which is the salad, and then you want to use a dressing that has nuts and seeds mixed in with the dressing, because we don't want to snack on nuts and seeds. We don't want to eat them with our breakfast too much with a fruit meal, or we want to save the nuts and seeds to consume them with the meal where we eat the most salad, because nuts and seeds facilitate the absorption of the carotenoid family and other phytonutrients to protect us against cancer. So if green vegetables have the highest protection against cancer, we want to facilitate those absorption of those nutrients that have the most anti-cancer effects. And we absorb almost 10 times as much nutrients when we eat the nuts and the seeds at the same time as we're chewing the salad. So you want to concentrate and chew the salad very well, and that's why we make the dressings, the orange cashew dressing, the blueberry pomegranate dressing. That's why I may make a dressing by adding some cashews and sesame seeds into it, or sunflower seeds and almonds, right? So the dressing is not, so we're not using oil on the salad, which actually has a negative effect. And we do have a lecture tomorrow talking about fats, where I'm going to go into the difference between fats and oils and nuts and seeds and the different effect on the body. But the bottom line here is that we want to maximize the absorption of these anti-cancer nutrients, and obviously we want to consume them in a way that maximizes their protection against cancer. And the ingredients in these vegetables that have the most powerful anti-cancer effects are called ITCs, or isothiocyanates. So the isothiocyanates, or ITCs, have powerful anti-cancer effects, and they're in green vegetables. And the green vegetables that are richest in ITCs are called cruciferous vegetable. And that's why we have some arugula, watercress, right? Some of the vegetables that you can eat raw cabbage on your salad and chewing them well, because those, and put a delicious dressing on them, because they have high anti-cancer activity. There's some of the isothiocyanates available in green vegetables, and their absorption is enhanced by chewing. If you swallow it whole, you're not going to form the ITCs, because look, here's the plant cell, right? And in the middle of the plant cell is a compound called glucosinolates. So the ITCs, or the isothiocyanates, are not in the plants until we chew them, because when we chew them, we break open the cell wall here, right? We break through the cell wall, we release in the membrane right under the cell wall where we house the myrosinase enzyme. And when you chew, you mix the myrosinase enzyme with the glucosinolates, and the isothiocyanates are formed in your mouth as you're chewing. If you don't chew them, you're not going to cause this chemical reaction to occur, and you're not going to form as many of the anti-cancer compounds. Now, looking at glucosinolates, so obviously we're talking here about eating cabbage and arugula and Brussels sprouts and broccoli and watercress and kale and collards. These are all cruciferous vegetables, and they contain glucosinolates. That's what makes them cruciferous. The word cruciferous comes from the Latin word for cross, because the flower of the cruciferous vegetables are shaped in a cross. It's like it's a flower comes out with 4 petals. And all the cruciferous vegetables, four petal vegetables, are high in glucosinolates, and the average American doesn't eat much glucosinolates, and the average Japanese, because they eat a little more green vegetables, has maybe almost 10 times as much. But it's really not enough. It's still not a good amount. We want to get to at least 300 milligrams a day. That's just triple the amount of vegetables. To achieve that level for ideal health, we got to eat a good amount of vegetables each day, right? And we have to eat them in a manner that maximizes the production of this. Take an onion, for example. Now, an onion has particularly powerful effects against cancer, right? Onion has, across the board, people who eat onions on a regular basis have 50% lower risk of almost all types of cancer. Imagine if there was a drug like that, where a drug could reduce almost all cancers by 50%, and if the drug cost $3,000 a month, everybody would be taking it, right? Now, the anti-cancer compounds in the onion aren't there in the onion until you cut the cell wall open in the onion, and you cause the enzymes to be released, and a chemical reaction occurs in your kitchen. And it gives off sulfuric acid. You notice how it makes your eyes burn, and it could, it has this bad odor? Well, you're forming the anti-cancer compounds as the onion is being cut. You follow me? If I take that onion and don't cut it up, I leave it whole, I just take the skin off and plop it into a soup, and I heated it up. Well, I would have inactivated the enzymes that would have created the biological compounds that have the powerful anti-cancer effects. So if I cook the soup, the onion in the soup, and I take it out with the tongs when it's soft and mushy, and then blend it into the soup base and pour it back in, you wouldn't have manifested the full protective effects against cancer. We've learned more in recent years. It's better to chop, puree, or blend the onion, allow the full biochemical effects to form those anti-cancer compounds, and then you can take that onion slur, that slurry of onion, and dump it into the soup and cook it. The cooking it won't destroy the biological anti-cancer compounds, but it would have prevented their formation if we threw it into the soup before it was chopped. Do you follow that? The same thing here with the green vegetables, right? With the cruciferous family of vegetables, we want to maximize we can cook them, we can eat them cooked and raw, right? But when we do cook them in soups, it would enhance the biological activity, their anti-cancer effects, if we puree or blend them but when they're still raw, in with that onion. So maybe I might ladle a little carrot juice out. So maybe 10 years ago I didn't know this. But now when I make my soups, or I teach people who have autoimmune diseases or have cancer, I want to magnify their protective potential. We want them to actually take the vegetables and prep them, chop them finely, blend them, shred them, get them in small pieces, then add them to the soup, as opposed to softening them, cooking them first, taking them out, and then cooking them or chopping them. You got it? So that's the purpose of this slide. Now we do have, as you eat certain foods on a regular basis, your body develops the bacteria to help digest those foods. And there are some bacteria that have myrosinase effects in the body. So when we're used to eating green vegetables, both raw and cooked, the body also develops the bacteria over time, over a few months, to be able to digest them and assimilate them and benefit from them better. Just like with beans. Right? Tomorrow in the weight loss lecture, we're going to talk a lot about beans and how beans facilitate weight loss, and how that as you first start eating them, you don't produce a lot of the bacteria that digest them well. And once you eat them for a while and eat them on a regular basis, your body is able to handle them better and better. The same thing is true with these green vegetables. The more you eat them regularly, the more your body develops the ability to digest them. So leading up to the idea here, we want to put the healthiest foods at the base of the pyramid. And so vegetables and beans and different colorful vegetables and fruit and nuts and seeds and whole grains. And we want, obviously, since animal processed foods get us nowhere, and animal products obviously should be held in a smaller amount or not at all, because it's very hard to control your protein intake when you're eating animal products too much. Even egg whites, even fish, which is low in fat, and even white meat chicken without the skin. It's very hard to not overdo protein, especially the methionine-producing proteins that raise IGF-1 when you're eating too many animal products. When you're eating beans and nuts and seeds, they're somewhat lower in the structure, the function of a branched-chain amino acids, and the type of amino acids that are present are not IGF-1 promoting and don't promote those hormones to raise in your tissues as well. So we want to keep animal protein to a reasonably low level. And just so you're aware that, for a lot of you who looked at Eat to Live or one of my books, that green vegetables are relatively high in protein per calorie. And that's the whole point. That vegetables occupy a lot of volume. And your stomach can only hold a liter of food, right? So you can't, if you're eating foods that have a high volume and a low caloric density, you're going to be full when you start eating a lot of it, and you're not going to have much room to put in too many calories at one time. The human stomach probably can't hold more than 400, 500 calories at a time when you're eating natural foods. You have to eat oil or meats or cheeses or processed foods to get that many calories in, or you have to eat too frequently. It's very hard to overeat on calories when you're eating processed. And then when you're eating a diet that has, obviously, green vegetables and beans and nuts and seeds, you're getting a lot of protein, and you're getting sufficient protein, but it's very hard to overeat on calories just by the volume of the food as well. So looking at this in detail, because people say, well, when you're moving to a diet that's either vegan or near vegan, where we're using animal products maybe as a condiment or a couple times a week in a small amount to flavor a dish, then how are you going to get enough protein if animal products aren't your major protein source? And obviously, what we're saying here is that green vegetables are high in protein. Just 1 cup of green vegetables give you 7 to 10 grams of protein, right? Broccoli here, I guess, is 2 cups, give you 10. Spinach, I guess, because it looks like it's 1 cup because it compacts down probably so maybe because it's compacted when it's frozen or cooked. So 1 cup of spinach is a lot of spinach. And nuts and seeds give you a lot. Beans give you quite a bit of protein. So obviously, it's very easy to get enough protein when you have beans, nuts and seeds, and green vegetables in the same diet. And they obviously, especially when they're mixed together, it gives you a complete protein in the sense that it increases the biological availability of the protein. So you don't have to overeat on protein, because if your biological value of the protein is very low, like for example in wheat, then you have to eat more of it, a higher amount, because you have some protein wastage. That your body can't assimilate and store it as well. When you're eating green vegetables with beans or green vegetables with nuts and seeds, the amino acid tide, after the portal tide that comes from the liver, is so complete that you're not going to utilize those to be able to use it as muscle tissue, and there's not going to be unbalanced proteins left over that have to be lost or excreted as much. And you don't have to overeat to get more protein. We get adequate protein without having to overeat food. That'll maximize muscle growth. Now, increased consumption of animal protein is not just breast cancer and prostate cancer. It's almost every cancer is increased in its obviously its incidence by an increased consumption of animal products. Because obviously animal protein and plant protein have different structures. And of course, animal protein raises cholesterol as well, and plant protein lowers cholesterol. Animal protein obviously promotes bone loss, and plant protein promotes bone strength. And of course, it's packaged with the things that are protective. So for humans, obviously, it's not just the animal fat, it's animal protein is obviously has some toxic effects. Comparing the nutritarian diet to a standard diet, obviously, it's based on micronutrient density, so it's vegetable-based. We want to eat a lot of natural foods, beans, fruits, nuts, and seeds. And oil, because oil is 120 calories per tablespoon, and Americans are eating about 400 calories of oil a day. 400 calories in oil a day, what's that per week, right? About 3,000 calories a week. That's about a pound of calories, right? A pound of body fat a week. And it might have been okay if they were, burning 4,000 calories a day or something. But oil is used sparingly, because oil also has an effect to promote fat storage on the body. The body can take oil and convert it into fat with no loss of energy. So we can take, let's say, I can have olive oil or corn oil or canola oil or flax oil even. And because it's an oil form and not a whole food form, the body can convert it and store it in your tissues within 3 minutes of putting it in your mouth. It can store it away as fat on your waist within 3 minutes with no change in structure. Just suck it in, absorb it, put it right away in a few minutes. When you eat fat from another seed, you don't have such biological efficiency, because there's sterols and stanols and phenols and factors in the nuts and seeds that suck fat into the gut like a sponge and actually suck cholesterol the other direction and prevent all the fat from being absorbed into the body. So you absorb the beneficial effects, and some of the negative effects are kept in the digestive tract, just like with beans. We're going to learn this week, when you look at a can of beans and it says 200 calories a cup, it's not 200 calories a cup, because those calories are not all biologically available to the body. We're going to explain that tomorrow. Just like we eat nuts and seeds, when it says 200 calories an ounce, it's not really 200 calories an ounce. And one of the reasons nuts and seeds are related to weight loss and not weight gain is because they actually suck fat in the other direction, from the inner of the body into the gut, so you actually excrete more cholesterol in the stool. You follow that one? So all the calories are not biologically available. And so when you take the oil out of the diet and instead substitute nuts and seeds as the major fat load, we get a complete host of beneficial biological effects, which we're going to talk about tomorrow, what those effects are. Okay? So we're talking here, we're focusing on nutrient-dense calories, and this diet can be done, a nutritarian diet could be done on a vegan diet, or it could be done on a diet that contains 1 or 2 servings of animal products per week. But I don't recommend people consume more than 1 or 2 servings of animal products a week. And I don't even recommend they consume, if they desire to consume animal products, I still recommend they don't have a large portion of animal product at any one meal. They just use it as a condiment effect, so they don't push up their level of animal protein to slow down digestion and to cause acidity and to put a stress in their body. So a standard diet obviously is grain-based with lots of dairy and meat, and oils supply a major caloric load. And obviously most Americans are consuming animal products 2 to 4 times a day, and it's focused on nutrient-poor calories. The opposite, it's focused on nutrient-poor calories. As a percent of calories here, we're talking that a standard diet gets about 60% of their diet from processed foods, and we're talking about preferably no processed foods or just a little bit of oil here and there. You know, animal products, if you use them, the American diet is 25%. That should be obviously not more than 2 to 5%. Whole grains obviously most of their grain consumption is not from quinoa, right? And wild rice, it's from white flour. And the grains should be whole grains and sprouted grains, could form a percent of the diet, and unrefined plant food should be the major, obviously, source of, obviously greater than 85%. Because whole grains could be considered unrefined plant food. That would be up to 95% right there anyway. There's more than 100 different studies that show that some cancers are very sensitive to the consumption of fruit, meaning the lack of fruit in a diet can increase the risk of cancer. And the phenols and resveratrols and bioflavonoids in fruit have powerful anti-cancer effects. Even this year, there were studies showing how protective even mangoes are against cancer. You guys know how protective berries are against dementia and cancer. Well, we're finding other foods like apples and mangoes and have protective effects against cancer as well. And it's not just grape skins that protect against cancer. It's these colorful foods have powerful effects against cancer. And I think one of the reasons that fat got such a bad name, in other words, that people are so afraid to consume fat, and so many people advocating a vegetarian or vegan diet focus on the benefits so that it's low in fat, because most fats consumed in the modern world are animal fats or refined oils, not nuts and seeds. And any study that shows negative effects of fats are always studies that are done on oils and animal fats or trans fats, and never when they're eating a whole food plant fat like avocado or nuts and seeds. So the concern here, and my concern, which we're going to talk about tomorrow, is this idea that the amount of fat is the major focus of what makes for a healthy diet, right? It's not the amount of fat, because a diet could be healthy if it's lower in fat, and it could be healthier that it's higher in fat. The amount of fat could be adjusted to a person's caloric needs. A world-class athlete requiring more calories may be on a diet that's 30 or 40% of calories from fat, and it could be perfectly healthy and for longevity, but he's burning off those calories that's designed for him. As long as you're not overeating on foods that are making you gain body fat, you can't be eating too much fat if it's a whole food source. So what I'm saying here, it's the high consumption of refined carbohydrates and refined oils and the consumption of animal products. It's that combination that results in the cancer, heart disease, dementia that we see in the modern world. Claiming it's from fat is not really accurate. And you know what it does? It leads to us getting nowhere in society, because we're so misinformed and people are so miseducated that all we create is a great split, a great chasm between the people who advocate that meat is so healthy and you need to have meat for your protein versus the vegan community advocates that meat is bad, and we really can't get anywhere because we have people showing science on both sides, and some people selectively culling the science to promote their views, and other people calling the science that a diet too low in fat could be dangerous to promote those views, and we're never going to meet. So comparing a low-fat vegan diet, which may be grain or starchy vegetable based, it might be based on rice, potatoes, bread, even white flour products, right? It could get people into trouble, such as developing irregular heartbeats, such as not being cancer protective, and that's why when we see studies on vegan diets from around the world, like in this vegan diet studies in England, there's vegans, right? We find that people generally are not getting major lifespan enhancements. They get somewhat lower levels of heart disease and levels of certain cancers, but other cancers go up, and we don't see the dramatic effects because the diet is not designed to obviously be vegetable-based, full of colorful whole foods, with those vegetables that have the most powerful anti-cancer effects in large amounts. And the vegetables that have the most powerful anti-cancer effects, to sum it up real quickly in 3 words, they are green vegetables, onions, and mushrooms. Have the most powerful anti-cancer effects. Green vegetables, mushrooms, and onions, right? And we're going to go into this. That's going to go into more detail as the week goes on. Now, when we design a diet style to be maximally protective against cancer, and we apply it to disease states, well, then we see the magic happening. And this is what's so much fun, is that the same diet style that maximizes the immune function to make the body a cancer-proof vehicle. And don't forget, we can win the war on cancer right now. We have the science to apply it right now. We know all the factors that cause cancer, right? We know the environmental factors. We know that when parents who are pregnant eat hot dogs and pastrami and don't eat green, we know all the factors. We'll go into that more as we go into that lecture later on in the week. But when you apply those same features, people's headaches go away. People's fibromyalgia gets better. They stop being asthmatic, right? Their arteries melt away. Their rheumatoid arthritis gets better. Their psoriasis gets better, right? Things like that. So we see people, even people who couldn't get pregnant are able to get pregnant. I remember I told you yesterday, I was telling some jokes on the stage last night about it. I was saying how people came up to me and thanked me. It reminded me of I was in Tampa a few months ago. And a man and his attractive wife come up to me before my lecture, and he says to me, and he actually was a physician, and he says to me, "You're responsible for getting my wife pregnant." And I looked at him and go, "What? What are you talking about?" So he goes, "Well, we've been trying to have a baby for 10 years, and finally, a year and a half ago, we read your books, and within 6 months, we have our first child." Something like that. And now she's pregnant. So, and she was pregnant at the time, actually. So very exciting. I thought that was funny, too. So there's actually medical doctors who specialize in fertility that use my books and my nutritarian diet in their practices because they found that they would increase the woman's fertility to eat better. And that makes sense. You're in better health. You have a better chance of getting pregnant. The problem is you got to start eating healthy when you're young so you don't cause premature aging of your ovaries. So to wrap it up is that nutrient density plays an important role so we can increase the intake of those superfoods, right? The purpose of it is not to, the purpose of this is really not to establish, which low nutrient food is better. right? And it's not really applicable, the Andes scoring system is not really that applicable to processed foods because, consider total cereal. If we artificially added nutrients into a fake food, it would come out with a higher Andes score, but that would no longer be representative of a food that naturally has phytochemicals in it. So it would be somewhat, distorting its use, right? The real purpose of it is to encourage the consumption of foods that are rich in nutrients, like berries, like tomatoes, like mushrooms, and among the carbohydrates, eat more beans. And of course, eat a lot of green vegetables. And 2, the lecture tomorrow is the second half, documenting how nutrient deficits fuel overeating and addictive eating, how you can't, if you don't meet your micronutrient needs, it's almost impossible to be a normal weight. And also that modern nutritional science has advanced to the point we want to make sure that no person is deficient in anything because we have somewhat different nutrient needs, that every person is not the same. And with the use of some blood testing and some adjusting to individual needs, we can assure people they can achieve the protection against disease later in life by knowing that making sure they're not missing anything they should have in their tissues. And of course, using modern nutritional science for individual medical conditions to maximize reversal and recovery. The other thing is, of course, is that even that a lot of people in conventional society thinks that way, in reality, most of us that have been eating this way for a long time feel that eating a nutritarian diet is the most favorable, exciting, pleasurable diet to eat. Because as your body gets healthier, your taste gets healthier. And you actually enjoy the flavor of the natural foods so much more than the processed junk. And when we're traveling, we don't want to eat the other stuff other people are eating because it doesn't even taste good to us, even if it wasn't bad for us, And we feel good when we eat it and feel bad if we go off it, so it reinforces itself. The problems with Eat to Live, of course, and referring to the word Eat to Live, and referring to the book Eat to Live that I wrote in 2003, the problem with it, like I'm sitting there getting my hair cut by a hair cutter, right? And she says to me, "You're Dr. Fuhrman. You wrote that book Eat to Live." And I said, "Oh yeah, that's right." And she said, "Oh, I read the book." I said, "You read the book Eat to Live? Really? Oh wow." I said, "Are you doing that way? Are you living that way? Did you change your diet?" "Oh, no, I couldn't do that." The point is that most people that read Eat to Live aren't doing it, right? Probably, I would guesstimate, probably 90% of people that read the book aren't following it. What would you guys guess? Something like that? Well, that's the point here, is that it's not going to work unless people actually do it, right? Now, when I wrote Eat to Live, I wrote it for a purpose. I wanted to make sure that the person with a serious condition who needed help could get help, could get the right information. Not design a book that would sell the best books or be a bestseller, but I wanted to fit that niche so that I wouldn't sell that person out who maybe had advanced heart disease or some problem that needed to get well, or they really had diabetes and they could have been dying. Because I remember it's interesting when I wrote the book, The Little Brown, the company was so excited about making this into a bestseller and telling me how I could tweak it to make it sell better with all these hooks and tricks that they know makes books sell. And I said, well, I don't want to make it a bestseller. I want to not, that's not my objective, is to sell more books, because then I would have to do those things. I would have to put in it what would make it sell better. I want to not sell out that person with advanced disease who's looking for an house. And as I said to them, you'll see, it won't sell that much, but it'll continue to sell year after year after year, because it'll develop a reputation and a following of people who know that if they have some problem wrong with them, and they'll go to that kind of a book, which is what happened. And the book's been out 8 years, and it's been in the, it's the only book, it's the only diet and health book ever that's been in the top 500 of Amazon, or that's sold that level for 8 years straight. It's still in the top 500 of Amazon now, 8 years after it's been out. So much so that the Little Brown Company came back to me 6 months ago and said they want a new Eat to Live to be published next year in 2011, to revise it. They'll give me another advance, and they made a book out of it, which is now available now. The book, VOOK, it costs $6. It's an Eat to Live application that's downloadable on an iPad or an iPhone or a computer, and it means that you can see the new revised Eat to Live, and you can read and you can see me on videos while you're reading, where I'm in my kitchen making an ice cream with my son, or we're in the gym working out, or we're talking in my office with a patient. So it combines video with the written part of the book. So what I'm saying is that it really worked that over the years, it wasn't that, not trying to make the tricks to make a book sell better, but there is enough people of intelligence out there who really want to have the facts told to them straight without trying to make them some crazy hook that makes normal people buy books. But the point is, one of the reasons I wrote Eat for Health and one of the reasons I revised Eat to Live is because over the years, with so many people who read the book and didn't do it, we realized that many people's decisions aren't just governed by science and logic. Their decisions are formed by emotional needs and addictions, social behaviors, their interactions with people, who their friends are, their personal self-worth, their feeling of self-worth, their ability to withstand being different. There are a lot of factors that affect why people choose to eat the way they do. And the more of those factors that can be addressed, and the more of those factors we can uncover, it increases the probability that people will be able to change their diet for the better. I remember I was in Toronto speaking to a group this large, actually, of physicians, of doctors, right? And before me, and as I presented to all the doctors in the hospitals, that one of the researchers was a researcher who actually does research on a nutritarian diet. And he got up there, and showing that it can reverse heart disease and lower cholesterol, and he got up there and he said, even though this is the most effective way to make a person reverse heart disease and treat heart disease, he said most people won't do it. The majority of people that are given this information, he made the statements that about 15 to 20% of people will do it, and 80% to 85% of people won't do it, was his statement. And I'm sitting in the back of the room, and I'm saying to, and I'm coming up to speak next, and my point, of course, was, we can't put those figures out or those numbers out. We haven't devised the perfect type of motivational techniques and teaching methods, and we can keep improving what we've been doing in the past. We can improve the way we teach it. We can improve the way we motivate people. We can give people, maybe that reflects the information, the way we're teaching it. Maybe we can teach it in a way to make 50% people change their diet, right? So they're trying to improve, so of course here that, we have to show people that it's not going to decrease their pleasure of eating, and because people's pleasure comes before their health concerns, and the more of these fears, and the more of the myths, and the more of the objections people have, the more those can be addressed. We're finding that the higher percentage of people that will make this change, and I'm getting, in my studies, very good in these early studies we're doing, that when we educate people fully, when they attend a full conference, when they have the interaction and tools available with them to teach them in a way that's more complete, that the amount of people choosing to do this is very, very high. And we have a very successful amount of people choosing to eat this way. And so we have to keep in mind that because just like smoking cigarettes or snorting cocaine, eating processed foods and eating unhealthily is powerfully addicting. And when you're an addict, you lose your keys to the bank, which means when you're an addict, your decision-making is no longer just based on intellect, intelligence, and logic. The brain wants to protect the brain. It will sacrifice the body in the process, right? The brain wants to maintain the status quo. So one thing is recognizing that this person can be very illogical and have illogical rationalizations why they want to maintain the status quo, and will increase our probability to motivate people if we understand this. And we're going to talk about this while we're here this week.
I wonder if you make recommendations on the body's hydration percentage levels, and also on whether we should be getting our water through produce consumption or the lots of water drinking.
Yes. I mean, the issue here is that, which we'll talk about those issues somewhat more, is that salt increases your risk of obviously having a stroke. And natural foods contain sufficient sodium, the right amount. We don't have to salt our food to get enough sodium. Natural foods have the right amount of sodium for us. But when we're doing that, the body keeps the right level of sodium in the tissues by holding on to sodium and not excreting so much in the urine. A person who's used to eating 10 times as much sodium as we're eating, that means their urine is excreting 10 times as much sodium as well every day. And when they go to a low sodium diet, the kidney may take a few weeks to start to hold on to sodium better. It'll still be pushing out a lot of sodium, and their level of electrolytes and sodium and other minerals in their bloodstream could go too low, could dip too low. And so the answer to your question is that that we don't need as much water as a person on a high sodium diet. The American diet is very dry, it's very high in sodium, it doesn't have a high water content, And when you eat a diet healthful like this, you're not as thirsty as much, you require less water, and if you're under the assumption you need 8 to 12 glasses of water a day, drinking all day long, you could be causing too much excretion of electrolytes, you can cause your sodium level to be too low, and you can cause you to become fatigued or to actually get cramping even. So you want to drink how much water that you require and not think that the objective is to drink as much as you possibly can. So the answer is a few glasses a day, and if you're exercising, drink water, and if you're thirsty, drink water. Try to estimate so you can drink before you get thirsty if you can. But neither should you think that overdrink water, neither should you obey the advice that to drink 8 to 12 glasses of water a day on this type of a diet, which is full of watermelon and tomatoes and vegetables, which are 90% water or more. And I don't think you need to measure hydration. I think you should eat properly and take the amount of water in so you urinate episodically and you're not thirsty. We don't have to measure ourselves and try to force a certain level of hydration. If that was the case, then people would probably be forcing themselves to drink too much water, because what happens is that you eat unhealthy and you have more toxicity. Your body holds on to water and holds on to fluids that dilute it, and it would show people that are more unhealthy have more hydration, and it's too confusing to recommend one amount of hydration.
You mentioned chopping or blenderizing the onions before cooking them in order to release the anti-cancer micronutrients, and I was wondering what other vegetables is it important to do that? And number two, I didn't really understand why blenderizing them prior to cooking them as opposed to after cooking them gave you availability of those nutrients.
The enzymes, the myrosinase, and the word enzyme has ace after it, myrosinase, right? It's an enzyme. That chemically converts the precursor, the compound in the vegetable, to the one that prevents cancer. And it's when the enzyme mixes with the precursor that's able to form the anti-cancer compound. And those enzymes are sensitive or destroyed. Their activity is hindered by heat. So we want to break it down and cause the chemical reaction to occur while the vegetable is still in its raw form. And then once we cause the chemical reaction to occur, then we can cook it. Because the chemical that has the anti-cancer effect is not sensitive to heat, just the enzyme is.
Question about the onions, mushrooms, and greens also. I was wondering where garlic would fit in. Does garlic have the anti-cancer properties that onions do?
Yes, it does.
Okay.
But the onions that have the most anti-cancer properties are the shallots and the onions that have more of the strong flavor. The more onions that are bred to be milder and are more like have no strong flavor or taste aren't as powerfully, have as much anti-cancer ingredients in them.
Garlic you'd consider strong.
Garlic and shallots and and red onion, the onions that have New York, I think they're called Northern New York onions. That the regular onions, I think the Vidalia onions are more bland and they're not as strong anti-cancer effects. I don't think it's very important anyway. But
well, I don't like onions. That's why I wanted to know about garlic. Thanks.
Yeah, I'm surprised by the research this year coming out showing how powerful onions are against cancer. That was very surprising to me.
Dr. Fuhrman, what is your position on low glycemic index complex carbohydrates and whole grain in the diet?
Obviously, I put beans at the top of the preferred carbohydrate and sprouted grains over non-sprouted grains, and the darker colored grains like black, mahogany, and wild rice over brown rice. So in other words, it appears that the ones that have the most darker colors have more flavonoids and fibers and resistant starch in them. So does that partially answer your question?
Well, I'm just kind of wondering. I didn't hear a lot about glycemic index or complex carbohydrates or whole grain, to the point, as much as I read everything you've almost written, that I wasn't certain what part it really plays in your diet.
Right. So the answer is that basically we're saying here that white potato and white rice do not have the favorable factors that sprouted wheat, sprouted grains do, and do not have the favorable resistant starches and lignins and other anti-cancer as would something like beans or peas or lentils.
So you do use a glycemic index to select your foods? Or?
The glycemic index should be used, but it shouldn't be the only factor which determines what's a good food or a bad food. We have to consider the resistant starch content, the carotenoid score, the phytochemicals it contains, the anti-cancer substance it contains, the fibers it contains, the resistant starch it contains, the sterols it contains, and the glycemic index. When we look at all those factors, clearly certain foods come way above other foods. So we should consider that in our starch choices. And that's when we choose to make dishes. We might choose to use wild rice over brown rice, or use quinoa, over white potato. And why we make bean burgers instead of a gluten burger or a seitan dish. You follow me? We're trying to make the recipes have the best potential for your health.
So my question is about all the other doctors in the world that haven't read your book yet and may not be reading the same research that you're basing things on. How would you recommend that we go back and have conversations with our doctors about, it's a partnership, and I certainly can go back and say, this is what I want to do, but I want to educate my doctor to look at some of the studies you're quoting from. Even in the first lecture, you mentioned some.
Well, okay,
so what would be the best way to do that?
I can partially help you with that question, but I'm not sure, because part of my answer is that I don't see why people have this tremendous preoccupation with trying to have to convert their doctors so they can get along with their doctors. I mean, I don't really see what it's like so many people are like telling me, well, my doctor's telling me one thing, you're telling me another, how do I convince my doctor so I can have him say the same thing you're saying? And I'm saying, well, why do you have to have him say the same thing I'm saying?
I don't, but historically, it's a very patriarchal relationship where the doctor is the patriarch telling us what we're supposed to do with our bodies.
Well,
and then we get recommended to be on medication.
Right, you're going to be here a whole week, and you're going to be the person with the expertise about health, not the doctor. The doctor is the expert about drugs. He's the drug specialist.
Not really. That's the problem.
And some doctors are specialists in surgical treatment.
Yeah.
Right? They choose their specialties. And in medical school, it was a great place if I wanted to be an orthopedic surgeon. They made it so I could actually go and work with orthopedic surgeons who were top in their field in my free time. And I could help them out and learn their techniques of doing the carpentry on the knee and everything else. And they wanted to make sure we were the best orthopedic surgeons possible. The point is that your doctor is not, he's trained in what he chose to be trained in, and he doesn't really know much more about this than the average teacher, electrician, lawyer, truck driver, or school principal, right? And so he needs to learn the basics, just like anybody else. So there's no difference in training a doctor than training your next door neighbor. And you don't go to your doctor for advice on things he does no expertise in, right? Which is generally if you're in a condition that requires medical care, there are some conditions that require conventional medical care. Some conditions require drugs and require surgery. Then you go to a doctor. The problem is people going to doctors for health advice and how to eat and how to, and the problem, of course, is, I want you to teach your doctor. I want you to train him properly. But I don't want that to be, but it's not like the idea that he has to be trained so you can listen to his advice. You follow me? Because it may not work that way. So recommend he read a book. Okay. And he won't read it anyway.
My question is about soy milk and tofu as a source of protein. I've read some other books that talk about that it actually has harmful effects, drinking soy milk and eating tofu. Is there any truth to that, or is there anything I need to be concerned about how much intake of that?
Yes and no. Well, first of all, I've done a very extensive investigations with myself and my research staff on investigating the relationship between soy and cancer. And there also is meta-analysis done on that subject as well. And the evidence is very, very conclusive. It's not controversial. There's no diverging opinions. It's very clear that as soy intake goes up in the diet, cancers go down, especially breast cancer. So there's no link between soy consumption and higher rates of cancer, even with patients who already have cancer. That's all myth. On the other hand, I teach that processed foods are not great, and that as a food becomes processed, it gets damaged. And I'm also teaching that variety of beans is important in a diet. And food variety is important too. So that means that we don't want a person to eat a lot of processed soy products. Maybe none would be better. But the less the soy is processed, the more it's a natural food, the more it's a whole food. And do I want soy to be the major bean you eat or the only bean you eat, or do I want you to eat a variety of beans? What do you think?
Variety.
Now, for example, corn is an okay food too. but I don't recommend Kellogg's Corn Flakes or Frito-Lay's potato chips that are made from corn. So some soy is junk food, right? And you wouldn't want to make a diet mostly of corn and call it a good diet. Corn could be part, you follow me? So what do you think about soy?
Oh, well, I drink soy and stuff. I was just noticing with your books, there's quite a few recipes that contain soy with the smoothies and things like that.
Yeah, but
So I
it's
thought,
used in-
okay, so that's just taking it and going, okay, let's have a little bit here, but let's not go overboard.
Exactly. And also now at home, I use less soy now than I did before because I like hemp milk better than soy. You know, you can buy unsweetened hemp milk, you can buy unsweetened hemp vanilla, and it's healthier than soy milk. You know, so it has a better fatty acid balance. You know, I'm not worried about the protein anyway, so you know, so there's almond milk. You can make your own milks. You could blend hemp and almond with water and soy and make your own mixtures. You know, there's all different options, but that's just to make a recipe convenient and not fear of using a little soy milk. You're not guzzling it all day long. You know.
What's the deal with drinking and also coffee?
Do you mean drinking alcohol?
Yes.
Oh, well, there's no deal at all with drinking. It's just that unfortunately, it's linked to breast cancer in women. I mean, in other words, a certain amount of drinks a week, you know, if you want to have a couple of glasses of wine a week, it's not going to be a risk factor, but if you had a couple of glasses a day, it's a significant risk factor for breast cancer. And I don't want people to have it themselves, you know, so alcohol is some link between alcohol and cancer.
And coffee, is it just the caffeine in coffee that's harmful? Or
There are some studies that show that women who drink decaf have a higher incidence of rheumatoid arthritis. And they think it's the chemicals that remove the decaf, that chemical residual from that pull out the caffeine. So I don't know that, I don't think there's a study on those water processed or low chemical residue. So I'm not an expert in that, in the caffeine removal process, but there is some link between decaf, coffee, and disease. As people drink 3 and 4 cups a day. So there's got to be something not healthy if there's that link. As far as caffeine beverages, and it's a medicine. It has some benefits, it has some phenols, it has some nutrients in it, but it also promotes addictive behaviors and withdrawal symptoms, and it's a drug. And drugs have have risks and side effects and may have some benefits for certain diseases, but also it makes people want to feel when their caffeine levels dip, they want to crave more food, they want to crave more drink. It puts you out of control to a degree. And I don't really like people to be out of control. I want them to be in touch with their natural sensations of the body and not be driven to drink or consume food because they're feeling withdrawal symptoms.
So is it okay for men to drink a couple drinks a day, or health-wise, does that affect
They should just be
anything?
drunk the whole time.
Alcohol with men, does that?
It's not as bad as with women, so they can handle more alcohol because their link between cancer and men is we hit a higher threshold of alcohol to have that link with cancers. With women, it's a very low threshold of alcohol and breast cancer.
Like how much alcohol for, like 2 drinks a day for a man, once a week?
I'm saying that probably 2 to 3 drinks a week for a woman, and maybe 4 to 5 a week for a man would still be in the range of not increasing the risk of cancer. Something
And
like
if they
that.
have more than that, it increases their risk of cancer?
It's not pure. This is not rocket. It's not definitive science here. I'm giving you a rough guideline of what the literature seems to show. So I can't say at 6 glasses they're going to be at high risk of cancer, or 8 glasses. I'm just giving you an opinion here.
Yeah.
All right.
4 to 5 a week.
What's that?
4 to 5 a week.
Correct. Maybe 4 to 5 beers one night. It may increase the risk of cancer. I mean, don't quote me or write this down. I'm not like defining this with putting this in stone or putting it in a book right now. You know what I mean? So I'm not encouraging people to drink 5 drinks, men to sit there and drink 5 drinks a week. But my guesstimate is that that's probably the kind of numbers that the literature shows. Okay?
So 2 beers a night. 2 a
2
night
beers a
wouldn't
night is
affect
14
them.
a week.
Yeah, 14 a week.
Yeah.
That's okay or too much?
No, that's not okay.